And then a guy named Ray Dennison dies playing football, college football. And his wife wants workers' comp and other benefits that anybody would want if their husband died playing football. But they create the term student-athlete to get around having to pay that family what they were owed, okay? So, well, it wasn't a student that got hurt. It was a student-athlete. They knew the risk they were taking. And so that's the term. If you ever get a chance to interview D. Smith, he's written a really wonderful op-ed about this that you can look up. But it's a term that you know isn't really associated with something that that is good and that is fair. And so the interesting part about Byers is he retires from the NCAA in 1987, and a few years later, he writes a book called Unsportsmanlike Conduct, condemning everything he created over those 36 years, condemning the term student-athlete, condemning the amateurism model, condemning the fact that players don't get paid. This was written in the early 90s by the guy who created it all. Wow. It was his penance for what he had done before he died. Wow. Okay?
Wow.
And that was in the 90s, and they still didn't change anything until they were forced to in the courts with O'Bannon. So that's the sidebar on why I don't like the term. It's also a way to understand the history of the industry and then all the breakdowns of the revenues of college sports versus the revenues of pro sports and how little a piece of pie the athletes get versus with scholarships and benefits, their piece is still much smaller than the salary piece of the pie that the pro leagues get. It gives you perspective, okay?
Right.
So in 2022, we're 1 year in the NIL, and I'm still the CEO at Influencer. And a lot of schools, more than 220 of them, are using our software to at least report all of the transactions their athletes are doing. Some are also using our fintech where the athletes are getting paid through our software. And so we had over $100 million of NIL data from that first year of NIL. It's 2022, NIL started in July 2021. And so a lot of leaders, athletic directors, commissioners asked me to come speak about what was going on in our data set because nobody really knew what was going on. They heard about this kid, Nico, from California, but he was going to Tennessee for $8 million. Is that real? Like, what's happening? There's no data.
Right.
So I would put my data up on a screen, and I would do it in places like DC where I met with all the FBS ADs at once, or I would do it at private meetings. And I'd say, hey guys, here's $100 million of NIL data. Okay. Almost 90% of the money is coming from your donors. They're laundering money through a shell company called a collective to pay your players to play at your school. And I know you don't like the words pay and play in the same sentence, but the reason we're here in this unstructured environment where NIL is being manipulated to be used to pay your players is because Ed O'Bannon beat you in court 6 years ago. And you didn't do anything to create a system and get in front of it. So now the system's happening to you. And there's new court cases. There's House versus the NCAA. There's Carter, Johnson, Hubbard versus the NCAA. And they're all about you, the school, paying the athlete directly for their services. And I think you got to figure this out because if you don't, it's going to just spawn out of control. And I get a lot of pushback. And so by the end of the year, I started to research what the NFLPA did with the NFL and how that really made the league into a league where everybody wins. And I started studying it in other pro leagues. Eventually, I met guys like D. Smith and many others who gave me their perspective on the situation. And I decided, you know what? I built Influencer. I've sold to Teamworks. It's mostly operating without me. This is the next problem to solve. There needs to be a seat at the table for college athletes to not only speak into compensation and how they get compensated and what the cap is and what the contract looks like, but to speak into what the agent regulations are and the financial advisor regulations are so they don't get taken advantage of. They need to speak into what the health and safety standards are, including the health care they should get when they're done playing. They need to speak into every part of what the experience is because when they do that, when you collectively bargain and you involve the athletes in agreeing to the rules with the league and they sign a document, there's no more lawsuits. And when there's no more lawsuits, you can start to have transparency and you can start to hold the rules accountable and enforce them. And that's what we still don't have as I'm talking about it right now in college sports. There are no rules. There isn't a transfer portal. That's a marketing term. You can unenroll and enroll anywhere you want, anytime you want. There is no cap. That they say $20 million, they're getting around that cap with marketing deals that allow athletes to get paid on top of the cap. And I love that the athletes are taking advantage of the system like that, but it's not sustainable. There's going to be a time where there's just not enough money except for a few amount of schools to be able to compete at the highest level. And we need to really create a system like the NFL, like the NBA, where it works. And the only way to do that is to have athletes at the table. So